It happened in a heartbeat, under the harsh studio lights. A panel that was supposed to be about unity and American values suddenly cracked wide open. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to cut through the airwaves. With a smirk that carried generations of entitlement, she spat the words that would echo across the nation. Why don't you just go back to Africa? For a second, the world stopped breathing. The room went cold. You could hear the thud of silence drop between camera clicks and live microphones. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't blink. The insult hung in the air, acidic and electric. The kind of sentence that doesn't just offend, it exposes. Somewhere, a producer whispered, "Keep rolling." Screens across America flickered. Phones lit up. Viewers froze mid-scroll, stunned. Because this wasn't just another argument, it was a collision between two versions of America. One that still clings to exclusion as power, and another that believes belonging is a birthright. The camera zoomed in on Jasmine's face. No outrage, no panic, just quiet fire behind the eyes. You could almost see her thoughts harden into steel. Not today. Not like this. On social media, clips began circulating before the segment even ended. The comment sections exploded shock, disbelief, fury, admiration. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. And while some defended Karoline's free speech, millions knew exactly what they'd just witnessed. The mask slipping off the polished rhetoric of patriotism to reveal something older, uglier, and deeply familiar. The narrator's voice cut through the noise. Steady and reverent. In that instant, millions of Americans saw something much deeper than politics. They saw the soul of a country tested. Because this was never just about two women on a stage. It was about who gets to claim America as home. The clip replayed again and again. Jasmine's silence became a mirror. Every viewer projected their own history onto it, the immigrant who was told to go back, the student who stayed quiet to keep their job, the neighbor who smiled through insult after insult. And as the world held its breath, waiting for her response, one truth became undeniable. Something historic had just begun, but no one, not even Karoline, was ready for what came next. The broadcast cut to a wide shot, but no one spoke. Not the moderator clutching their cue cards. Not the analysts in the control room staring at their monitors. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, lingering on the stunned faces that filled the frame. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had refused to move forward. Then the noise returned, chaotic, uncontrollable, alive. On one side of the split screen, Karoline Leavitt shifted in her seat, the corners of her mouth twitching with defiance. On the other, Jasmine Crockett remained still, her silence louder than any insult could ever be. Viewers around the country leaned closer to their screens. Something seismic had just cracked open on live television. In living rooms from Detroit to Dallas, families looked at one another in disbelief. Some mouths hung open. Others whispered, "Did she just say that?" A grandmother clasped her chest. A college student paused mid-scroll, rewinding to make sure they'd heard correctly. And somewhere in a newsroom, a producer shouted, "Clip it, get that online right now." Within minutes, the internet became an inferno. Tweets fired like fireworks. She didn't just say that on air. How is this 2025? Jasmine's silence says more than 1,000 rebuttals. The hashtags began trending before the debate even ended. Hashtag go back to Africa. Hashtag Crockett response. Hashtag this is America. News anchors scrambled to react in real time, voices quivering between disbelief and condemnation. Late-night hosts began rewriting their monologues before the studio audience had even arrived. Cable networks played the clip in slow motion, analyzing facial expressions like a national crime scene. Commentators spoke with the urgency usually reserved for breaking national news, because, in a way, that's exactly what it was. This wasn't a gaffe. It was a cultural fault line exposed under pressure. The next morning, the headlines screamed, "A debate turns ugly." Leavitt's words ignite a firestorm. America's wound reopened on live TV. Think pieces poured in within hours, each dissecting, reframing, arguing what this moment really meant. Some claimed it was proof that civility in politics was dead. Others saw it as the raw truth surfacing after years of denial. But to millions of Americans watching, it wasn't abstract at all. It was personal. For every immigrant who'd ever been told to go back, for every Black American who'd been made to feel like a visitor in their own homeland, the sting was visceral. This wasn't just two politicians trading blows. It was the echo of history reverberating through the present. Clips of Jasmine's face, still strong, unflinching, became symbols overnight. Artists painted her expression. Activists quoted her silence. Commentators called it the calm before the cultural storm. Even those who'd never heard her name before suddenly knew it. She was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a mirror reflecting a nation's contradictions. Meanwhile, Karoline's supporters dug in, spinning her remark as just rhetoric or taken out of context. The online trenches deepened. America wasn't just divided by politics, it was split by perception. One half saw an insult. The other half saw exposure. And through it all, the clip kept playing. Over breakfast. On buses. In classrooms. In the quiet glow of late-night TikToks replayed again and again. Each viewer waiting to see how Jasmine would answer, because everyone knew she would. She had to. Silence was no longer just silence, it was suspense. A country that claimed to value freedom was about to witness what dignity looks like when it's tested in front of millions. But to understand why her words cut so deep, we need to see who these two women truly are. Before the insult, before the cameras captured that one sentence that would define her legacy, Karoline Leavitt was a story America thought it already understood. A small-town girl from New Hampshire, sharp-tongued, ambitious, and certain that being loud was the same thing as being brave. She called herself a fighter for truth, but what she really fought for was attention. And in the outrage economy of modern politics, attention was currency. She began in conservative media, cutting her teeth as a communications aide who learned quickly that volume beats logic. Producers loved her energy, fast, fiery, unapologetic. Her commentaries went viral, not because they were profound, but because they made people furious. Each segment brought more followers, more retweets, more validation. She started believing the echo chamber she had built was America itself. Friends called her fearless. Critics called her reckless. But to Karoline, it was all the same. Every backlash only confirmed that she was triggering the right people. She built a brand on confrontation, never pausing long enough to wonder what she was actually defending. In her world, empathy was weakness, compromise was betrayal, and outrage was oxygen. When she entered politics, the formula stayed the same. The slogans were sharper now, the audiences larger, the applause more addictive. Her speeches leaned on buzzwords like real America and taking our country back. The crowds roared. They saw her as the voice that dared to say what others were too scared to admit. And she drank it in like holy water. Inside her inner circle, strategists egged her on. They told her controversy was power, that the algorithm loved chaos. Every insult became a headline. Every headline became a donation drive. When she called opponents ungrateful or un-American, she watched her metrics spike. Her smile grew a little tighter, her tone a little meaner. The numbers rewarded cruelty, and so cruelty became the brand. But beneath the swagger, there was something else, the fear of irrelevance. Karoline had tasted what it meant to be seen, and nothing terrified her more than being forgotten. Every viral moment became a drug hit, and the crash afterward felt unbearable. So she'd push the line further, chasing the next shock. Her team would call it authenticity. Her critics would call it what it was: desperation dressed as confidence. Those closest to her noticed the shift. The laughter off camera grew thinner. The talking points sounded rehearsed, even to her own ears. Still, she couldn't stop. Being provocative wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. By the time she walked onto that stage beside Jasmine Crockett, she was no longer a rising star, she was a brand built on friction. She believed she could dominate any conversation, humiliate any opponent, win any crowd. That arrogance wasn't spontaneous. It was carefully constructed through years of applause for bad behavior. The irony was that Karoline saw herself as the underdog, a warrior against the elite establishment. But in truth, she had become everything she claimed to fight: insulated, privileged, certain that her worldview was the only one that mattered. Her tell it like it is persona wasn't about honesty. It was about performance. And like all performers, she'd begun confusing the role for the person. Her advisors noticed her temper flare in smaller ways. Snide remarks backstage. Eye rolls during prep sessions. They joked she had main character syndrome. She laughed with them, but deep down, she believed it. Every debate, every camera, every microphone existed for her to deliver the line. That perfectly viral moment that would keep her trending for one more day. So when she sat across from Jasmine Crockett, when the lights hit and the crowd hushed, Karoline wasn't thinking about policy or people. She was thinking about impact, about going viral, about crafting the next Karoline moment. And when those words, "Why don't you just go back to Africa," slipped out, she thought she'd just scored another one. She didn't realize that this time, the applause would never come, because in her quest to prove, she feared nothing. Karoline had finally crossed a line that even her echo chamber couldn't disguise. She had mistaken cruelty for courage one too many times. And somewhere deep down, perhaps for the first time, she felt the silence of a crowd that didn't know how to clap for her anymore. But while Karoline chased attention, another woman had quietly built an armor forged in struggle. Long before the lights, the headlines, or the viral moments, Jasmine Crockett's story began in a quiet Texas courtroom with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. She wasn't famous then. She wasn't even well-funded. She was just a young public defender walking into rooms where justice was often tilted before the first word was spoken. The air was heavy with expectation, not that she'd win, but that she'd lose gracefully. She refused to accept either. Day after day, she stood beside people who couldn't afford to be heard. Mothers facing eviction. Young men written off by a system that never learned their names. Teenagers who'd made mistakes but deserved more than statistics. Jasmine's voice didn't shake. It never needed to rise above the noise, because truth has its own volume when spoken with conviction. The judges noticed her composure. Her opponents noticed her relentlessness. And her clients, most of them worn down by hopelessness, saw in her eyes something rare. Belief. She had learned early that dignity is not granted. It is claimed. Growing up, her parents taught her that humility and courage are not opposites, they are companions. Her father used to say, "Grace is the weapon of the strong." She carried that lesson into every courtroom, every protest, every sleepless night writing briefs under the buzz of a desk lamp that burned longer than the sun. There were nights when the victories didn't come, when clients lost faith, when headlines ignored her work and the world seemed to move backward. She'd drive home in silence, replaying every argument, wondering if she'd failed the people who trusted her. But every morning, she returned ironed suit, measured voice, eyes unflinching. Because for Jasmine, justice wasn't a job. It was muscle memory. Her name began to travel, whispered first in community halls, then spoken aloud in rallies, then echoed in city chambers. When she finally ran for office, it wasn't ambition that drove her. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from watching the same injustice repeat itself until someone finally says, enough. Her campaign was scrappy, underfunded, and powered by volunteers who saw her not as a politician, but as a protector. She didn't promise miracles. She promised a fight, and she kept it. In Congress, she brought that same public defender energy, calm, calculated, unwilling to yield when power tried to silence her. While others shouted for attention, she built her reputation in the quiet power of persistence. Every speech, every question, every moment of silence was deliberate. What people admired most about Jasmine Crockett wasn't her anger, it was her control. She knew the cost of losing composure in a world that weaponizes emotion against women who look like her. So she learned to hold her fire until the exact moment it mattered most. Her restraint wasn't timidity. It was strategy. There were those who underestimated her, the pundits who dismissed her as too polished, the colleagues who mistook her grace for naivety. They didn't see the long nights of studying case law, the years spent defending the voiceless, the quiet steel beneath the poise. They didn't see the woman who had learned to carry the weight of history on her shoulders without letting it bend her spine. And yet, Jasmine never lost her sense of humor. She could disarm a room with a smile. She could turn hostility into humility with a sentence that sounded like poetry, but landed like truth. People often said she had the patience of someone who's already won. She liked that, because in her heart, she believed winning wasn't about beating the other side. It was about changing the temperature of the room until even your enemies had to feel the warmth of your humanity. Her staff loved her for that. They said she moved through chaos like water, calm, adaptive, unstoppable. They'd see her pause before interviews, close her eyes, and whisper something to herself. One aide once asked what it was. Jasmine smiled and said, "Just reminding myself that my ancestors already survived worse. This is just another room." Every insult she'd ever faced, every side-eye in the hallway, every condescending tone, every coded slight had only strengthened her composure. She knew that sometimes the most radical act in America was to remain calm when the world expects you to explode. She carried that calm like armor dot, so when she walked onto that debate stage beside Karoline Leavitt, she wasn't thinking about power or politics. She was thinking about responsibility, about the generations who fought, so she could stand there, microphone in hand, fully seen. She knew her presence itself was protest. And she knew that sometimes dignity can sound louder than rage. When the insult came, the air sliced open. It was meant to wound, to humiliate, to put her back in her place. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Because her place wasn't something to be dictated. It was something she had already built brick by brick. Case by case, truth by truth. She looked at her opponent, not with hatred, but with the stillness of someone who has already survived worse storms. To her, this was not the beginning of a fight. It was the latest test in a lifelong lesson that grace is not weakness. And silence can be a sword. And when the cameras caught that glimmer in her eye, that almost imperceptible moment before her response, the world didn't yet know it was watching history dot. So when the insult came, it didn't break her. It became her microphone to the world. The air in the studio turned dense, almost visible like static before a lightning strike. The moderator cleared their throat, fumbling for control, but it was already too late. The tension had its own rhythm now. Every breath, every side glance, every flicker of light off the microphones seemed choreographed by chaos itself. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her smile stretched thin and sharp. "See, this is the problem," she said, gesturing toward Jasmine with that mix of arrogance and mock disbelief. People like her make everything about race, everything. The crowd shifted. A few murmured. One man laughed under his breath. Jasmine remained perfectly still. No reaction, no rebuttal. Just that same calm, the kind that unnerves bullies because it doesn't give them a mirror to feed on. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers steady, posture regal. She blinked once, slow, deliberate. She began softly. "You know," she said, her voice low but steady, "I've been told a lot of things in my life. Too loud, too ambitious, too different. But go back." She paused, letting the words linger. "That one's special. Because it always tells me more about the speaker than about me." The room didn't breathe. The moderator froze. Karoline shifted in her seat, the smirk on her face faltering like a light flickering before it dies. Jasmine continued, her tone still measured, but each syllable cutting clean through the air. "I was born in this country. I've served this country. I've defended people this country forgot. My ancestors built this country while being told they didn't belong in it. So if we're talking about who should go back, maybe we should start with the idea that some Americans own this place more than others." Her words fell like hammers wrapped in silk, precise, unrelenting, irrefutable. She wasn't shouting, but the quiet was thunderous. You could see Karoline's breathing quicken, her hands fidget beneath the table. The cameras caught it all. The forced smile, the nervous swallow, the dawning awareness that the stage she'd built for herself had become a courtroom and Jasmine was the one questioning her. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, eyes still locked on Karoline's. "The thing is," she said, "you can't tell someone to go back when you've never once asked them what they've done to stay. I've spent my life fighting for justice, fairness, and equality, not just for people who look like me, but for everyone who calls this place home. Because I believe in an America that doesn't need to send people away to feel whole." A ripple of applause started from somewhere in the audience, hesitant at first, then building, rising. Karoline's smile stiffened, the kind of smile people wear when they realize the room no longer belongs to them. She tried to interject, but Jasmine's voice rose just enough to hold the space. "You see, what you said tonight isn't new. It's recycled. It's the same tired idea that's been used for centuries to draw lines between who counts and who doesn't. But here's the truth. Those lines don't protect America, they imprison it. Because every time someone says, 'go back,' what they're really saying is, 'I'm afraid of how much stronger we are when we stand together.'" The crowd was silent now, not because they didn't agree, but because they were witnessing something sacred. Jasmine wasn't performing. She was preaching in the language of justice, not vengeance. She turned toward the camera, speaking now not just to Karoline, but to the millions watching at home. "So, to anyone who's ever been told to go back, whether it was another country, another neighborhood, another classroom, let me tell you, you're already home. You've always been home. Don't ever let someone who confuses privilege with patriotism tell you otherwise." The audience erupted. The applause thundered through the set, breaking through the awkward stillness that had held everyone hostage minutes earlier. The moderator exhaled audibly. Karoline's eyes darted down to her notes, her jaw tightening as she pretended to smile. But the camera didn't let her hide. The viewers saw the tremor in her lip, the flicker of humiliation beneath the makeup and lights. Jasmine waited. She didn't bask in the applause. She let it wash over her, then fade. When she spoke again, her voice softened. "We can do better than this," she said. "Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. America doesn't move forward by telling people where they don't belong. It moves forward when we recognize that every voice, even the ones we disagree with, belongs at the table. That's how you make a country, not a club." Her closing words landed like a benediction. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch the glimmer in her eyes, not tears, but conviction. And if standing here, if being who I am, makes someone uncomfortable, then maybe that discomfort is exactly what this country needs to grow. The applause swelled again, this time uncontainable. The sound was less of approval and more of release, as if a collective breath had been held for too long and finally let go. Karoline clapped once. Twice. The way someone claps when they've lost a fight and hope no one notices. Her forced grin twitched into something brittle. When she turned to face the camera, she looked smaller not because Jasmine had humiliated her, but because Jasmine had refused to play her game. Dignity had dismantled arrogance without breaking a sweat. The director cut to a wide shot. The audience on its feet. The commentators in the booth whispering, "We've got a moment." And they were right. Within seconds, social media detonated. The clip hit X first, then TikTok, then everywhere. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Hashtag Crockett Clapback. Hashtag This is America. Hashtag Grace over hate. Influencers quoted her. Politicians retweeted her. One post simply read, "Jasmine Crockett just redefined patriotism." Comment sections turned into confessionals. Viewers shared their own stories of being told to go back. Immigrants, students, soldiers, and parents all finding pieces of themselves in Jasmine's calm defiance. Someone tweeted a side-by-side image. Karoline's smirk fading as Jasmine spoke captioned, "Arrogance melts in the face of grace." It went viral in under an hour. Cable networks cut the rest of the debate to replay the exchange in full. One anchor called it the moment that reset the moral temperature of the country. Another said, this was more than a debate, it was a reckoning. Through it all, Jasmine said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her silence after the speech carried more power than any rebuttal could. Karoline's team scrambled to control the narrative. They released statements about context and media manipulation, but no one cared. The clip had already escaped into the bloodstream of the internet, untouchable and immortal. By midnight, Jasmine's follower count had tripled. Her words had been set to music, turned into TikTok remixes, embroidered on t-shirts, printed on protest signs. One trending comment read, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard." Somewhere in a quiet hotel room, Jasmine watched the playback once, then turned off the TV. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just sat in stillness, the same stillness that had carried her through every courtroom, every insult, every test of composure. Because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much larger conversation. She exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible. Outside, the night hummed with the static of a country suddenly wide awake. But the real explosion wouldn't happen in that room, it would happen online. By sunrise, the clip had consumed the internet. Millions had already seen it, replayed it, dissected it, and turned it into a cultural moment that no one could escape. What began as a televised debate had mutated into something larger, a mirror reflecting America's split soul. On TikTok, the clip looped endlessly, Jasmine's calm voice cutting through Karoline's sneer like sunlight through fog. Creators added captions, reaction videos, and teary duets. One user whispered, "This is the kind of grace my mother told me about," while another wrote, "That's what dignity looks like in real time." The sound of Jasmine's words, "You're already home. You've always been home," became a trending audio. Layered under videos of immigrants unpacking memories. Soldiers saluting the flag, families embracing across cultures. On X, the reaction was a digital earthquake. Politicians tweeted cautious statements, some praising Jasmine's composure, others accusing her of playing the victim. Civil rights leaders called it a turning point. This wasn't a debate moment, one wrote. It was a moral reset. Celebrities jumped in. Ava DuVernay called Jasmine's response a masterclass in power and peace, while Viola Davis posted simply, "When grace becomes a revolution." News anchors on morning shows replayed the moment with the reverence of a national address. One commentator said, "This wasn't about policy. It was about who gets to belong." Another countered, "It's proof that the language of exclusion still sells." The panelists argued. The hosts shifted uncomfortably, and America watched itself argue in real time, not left versus right, but decency versus denial. By afternoon, the memes arrived. Jasmine's steady gaze captioned, "When they go low, just stare higher." Karoline's frozen smirk became the face of arrogance, looped beside her own words like a confession on repeat. Late-night hosts crafted monologues around it. One joked, "Some people go viral for cat videos. Others for accidentally redefining what it means to be American." The audience roared, but beneath the humor, something heavier stirred. College classrooms replayed the clip in social science discussions. Churches quoted Jasmine's line about belonging during Sunday sermons. Community centers held watch parties not for entertainment but reflection. This wasn't trending, it was transforming. Still, not everyone was celebrating. The backlash came just as fast. Right-wing pundits doubled down, calling Jasmine divisive, accusing the media of race-baiting. Hashtags like #RealAmericans and #FreeSpeechFirst trended alongside #Crockett Clapback. Conservative talk shows played the clip in outrage cycles, editing her speech to sound defiant instead of dignified. "This is what happens," one host growled, "when victimhood becomes a brand." But their anger couldn't drown out the resonance. Jasmine supporters didn't need to shout, they just shared. Each repost became a quiet declaration. "We see her. We stand with her." Outside the digital storm, protests sprouted in city squares. Handmade signs read, "Go back? We never left." Artists painted murals of Jasmine surrounded by ancestors, her gaze unbroken, her voice captured mid-sentence. High school students recited her words at assemblies. The country, in its messy, divided way, was processing something it had buried for too long. Who gets to claim America as their own? Cable news tried to quantify it. The Crockett moment. They called it as if it were a hurricane. Charts, polls, debates, all trying to measure a feeling. But feelings don't fit into segments. What Jasmine had done wasn't measurable. It was spiritual. Karoline Leavitt, meanwhile, retreated from interviews, her team releasing statements about context and media distortion. Yet every attempt to rewrite the moment only made it replay louder. She had stepped into the spotlight seeking dominance and instead became a symbol of what arrogance looks like when confronted with grace, somewhere between outrage and admiration. America began arguing with itself. What does patriotism mean when your first instinct is to tell someone to leave? What kind of love for country demands exclusion? Talk radio filled with callers, veterans, teachers, immigrants, wrestling aloud with those questions. One voice, an older man from Ohio, broke down on air. "I fought overseas. My unit looked like America, all colors, all faiths. If anyone told one of us to go back, they'd have had to answer to all of us." That clip, too, went viral. By week's end, Jasmine was everywhere, not by choice, but by necessity. Her silence had become a message. Her grace had become resistance. The debate had ended, but the real conversation had just begun. The nation wasn't just watching her anymore. It was watching itself, the discomfort, the pride, the reckoning. Because moments like these don't just divide a country. They reveal it. The hashtags faded, but the echo remained. Families talked at dinner tables. Teachers quoted her in classrooms. For once, a viral moment wasn't about destruction. It was about reflection. And in that reflection, a quiet truth began to surface. Steady and undeniable. But as the dust settled, one truth became undeniable. The storm of outrage and applause eventually quieted, as storms always do. But something in the air had changed. Beneath the noise of hashtags and headlines, a stillness took hold, the kind that follows revelation. For days, people replayed Jasmine's words not for drama, but for meaning. There was something timeless about the way she carried herself. No shouting, no vengeance, no gloating. Just clarity. Just grace. In a world that often rewards hate with attention, Jasmine reminded everyone that grace is the loudest microphone. Her composure didn't just silence her opponent. It recalibrated the national tone. Where arrogance sought spectacle, she offered substance. Where cruelty sought reaction, she offered reflection. And where insult sought to wound, she chose to heal by standing firmly in who she was, unshaken, unbent, undeniable. Historians began to place her words beside moments of moral clarity that had defined generations. Rosa Parks refusing to move. Michelle Obama reminding the world, when they go low, we go high. Martin Luther King Jr. preaching that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Jasmine Crockett's moment didn't come with marches or manifestos, but it echoed those same vibrations of truth, the quiet, defiant power of dignity in the face of disrespect. For millions watching, she became more than a politician. She became a symbol, not of party, but of possibility. Of what happens when someone refuses to descend into the mud, when they choose to hold the mirror instead of the megaphone. People saw in her the version of America they wanted to believe in. Diverse, courageous, grounded in moral clarity. Teachers used her response as a lesson in rhetoric and restraint. Parents showed their children the clip as an example of how to confront cruelty without losing yourself. In community centers and classrooms, her name became shorthand for strength without spite. The debate wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about the posture of integrity, what it looks like when someone stands their ground, not with fists, but with faith in their own worth. And yet, Jasmine never positioned herself as a hero. In her few public comments afterward, she brushed off the praise, redirecting attention to the bigger picture. "This isn't about me," she said softly in an interview. "It's about the America we all deserve, one where no one has to prove they belong." That humility only deepened the respect. Because true leadership, the kind that endures, isn't about domination. It's about demonstration. Jasmine had demonstrated what every great moral figure before her understood. That dignity is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength, the kind that can't be taken, only revealed. Over time, even some of her critics softened. Quietly, off-air, a few admitted they'd been moved. Not convinced, maybe, but touched. Because her words had forced them to see themselves, and that's the most uncomfortable truth of all. The insult that was meant to divide had instead united millions under a single, unspoken belief. We are better than this. The clip began to fade from the news cycle, but its resonance lingered like a melody you can't forget. Long after the headlines shifted, her words lived on in murals, in classrooms, in the memories of those who felt seen for the first time. And as the nation stepped back from its collective reflection, it wasn't the outrage people remembered. It was the calm, the poise, the reminder that integrity doesn't shout. It stands in an age addicted to noise. Jasmine had taught a lesson that felt revolutionary in its simplicity. Silence, when grounded in truth, can roar louder than hate ever could. Her legacy from that night wasn't a viral moment. It was a mirror held up to America's conscience. A reminder that belonging isn't granted by power, and identity isn't validated by permission. She didn't just answer an insult, she redefined what it means to belong. The headline said it all. Karoline Leavitt insults Jasmine Crockett, but her response shocks all of America. Yet, by the end, it wasn't the insult that mattered. It was the answer. The calm, unflinching truth that traveled further than hate ever could. Jasmine's composure turned a moment of ugliness into a national mirror, and what America saw reflected was possibility. Because that's the real story here. Unity through dignity. In a culture that often confuses volume with conviction, she reminded us that truth doesn't need to yell to be heard. It just needs to stand firm. Her grace wasn't silence. It was strategy. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. When arrogance tried to provoke, she answered with poise. When division tried to dominate, she responded with clarity. And in doing so, she didn't just win a debate, she reminded millions of what leadership actually looks like. So now, the question turns to us. What do we do with that moment? Do we let it fade into the scroll of forgotten headlines, or do we carry it forward as proof that empathy is still power? If you believe dignity is the new rebellion, share this story. Let it echo through your timelines, your classrooms, your dinner tables. Because silence doesn't protect the innocent, it protects the villain. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about principle. About the kind of America that stands tall, not by shouting others down, but by lifting one another up. The screen fades to black. Slow orchestral music swells. An image of the flag ripples softly across the frame. And words appear, a promise, a reminder, a creed. Strength is grace under fire.